Good morning, everyone. I will be lecturing today on Herodotus of Halicarnassus, who's considered the father of history, first Greek, first person to write history as we think of it as an academic discipline, although he's not really an academic, so to speak. There's a photo of him, well, a bust of him. It's a Roman copy of an original that I believe is in the Cambridge Museum. Um, yeah, he's a pretty cool figure. I did my master's thesis on Herodotus. I really like him. He's really enjoyable. Herodotus is from the town of Halicarnassus. It's in modern day Turkey. Halicarnassus is very interesting as a town within the Greek world because it is a Greek settlement, but it's also a Persian settlement, and so we have this amalgam of Persian culture with Greek culture, and so this leads to some very interesting ideas in Herodotus. Whereas most Greeks are very Greek is the way you go. You're very I am Greek and everyone else is bad. The idea of the Greek versus the other. Not really so in Halicarnassus. We have Greeks who have Persian names, Persians who have Greek names, and we have a sharing of a culture as a melting pot kind of thing. And this will manifest itself in Herodotus's writing. He was born sometime around 486 BCE, and it's so he's writing in or he's growing up in the aftermath during and aftermath of the Persian invasion of Greece. First Persian invasion under Darius in 480, the second one 490, second one under Xerxes in 480 to 479 BCE, and so he doesn't know a time in which the Persians didn't march through. The Persians were in a great empire, and the Greeks and their little ragtag band of poleis didn't beat them. And so this leads him, of course, to write his histories. He spent most of his adult life traveling, or so people say. You come down on two sides. Either Herodotus made up and is fanciful with the places he visited, or he actually visited them. I tend to think he actually visited them, but in doing so, you have to somehow reconcile why he got a lot of stuff wrong. Um, in his dissertation, but that's another topic for another day. Supposedly, he spends an entire book and a half on Egypt, spends about a fourth of a book on Scythia. Babylon takes up about a half a book to a book. Um, he also visits Ethiopia, or so he claims to have visited Ethiopia and some other places as well. Background to his work, the histories. He began writing about 450 BCE. Of course, all of this is circumstantial. We have no real evidence to say Herodotus started writing stuff down this year. Doesn't happen. So we think he began writing by 450 BC. He starts with the Greek victory over the Persian invasion. So he starts really at the end. He starts with books 7 through 9. He writes those down. And then we think, or most scholars think, he went back and then rewrote his uh, ethnographic sections, his later digressions on culture and the importance of certain peoples. Specifically like Babylon, because Persians conquered Babylon under Cyrus. Egypt, because the Egyptians are conquered by the Persians under Cambyses. Scythia holds off against the Persians under Darius. Ethiopia holds off against against Cambyses in the desert. So Herodotus sometime later went back and and added these sections in. We see constant revision going on throughout his work, throughout his narrative. And that's fairly common within the ancient world. It wasn't, I wrote it and now I'm done, like a Stephen King novel. It's you spend a lot of time crafting it. And so his work starts off right with his name, something that's not terribly common, something that hasn't happened before in the ancient world. So when we look at Homer on the next slide, for example, it doesn't say, I, Homer, am doing this, which is very interesting as to why Herodotus shifts this idea. The translation there is mine. Herodotus of Halicarnassus presents the inquiries in order that the deeds of men not be forgotten to time, that the great and wondrous deeds of both the Greeks and the barbarians not be without their glory, and above all the cause of war, a cause of the war with each other. And so he starts off with Herodotus Halicarnassus. So he's saying, I am Herodotus from Halicarnassus, and these are my inquiries. This is what I'm doing. And this is why I'm doing it. I'm showing you the cause of the war, yeah, but I'm also going to talk about the great deeds of both Greek and barbarians. And why those factor into the war. And so this is how he gets away with, if we think about it as a modern essay, a 6-book digression on Croesus, Babylon, Egypt, Cambyses, Cleomenes of Sparta, and so on and so forth. Um, because this is all somehow tied into his narrative of the Persian invasion and the Greeks successfully defending off that Persian invasion. So you can't really understand that without going back and seeing Cyrus conquered Croesus to start, and then the Persian expansion of their empire. When we compare him with Homer, so the Greek of Homer here is Andramoienepi Musa Polutropon Hosman Lapola Plank Theepitroies Hieron Tolethion Epersin. Sing to me, O Muses, of the many-wayed man who was turned aside many ways, when the citadel of Troy was sacked. And this is Homer's Odyssey, that right at the beginning. So this is the pream of Homer, and here we have the pream of Herodotus. Again, Herodotus, his name starts off right there. Homer, there's no mention of Homer. We have the Muses, though. Musa, sing to me, O Muses. Which is an interesting idea when we juxtapose Homer with Herodotus, because, well, one, Homer's poetry, Herodotus' prose, but two, the authority by which they get, the authority that grants them their ability to write or perform. Herodotus, his authority comes from his inquiry. It comes from his autopsy into the past. It comes from him traveling, talking with people, chronicling what they said. Whereas Homer and Hesiod and other epic poets in that line, their authority comes from the Muses. The Muses tell them what is true, what is not true. And so the poet has no say, has no stake in the matter, because he is seen as a manifestation of Homer, and therefore, by extension, the Muses. In the Platonic idea, he is a mere mimesis of the Muses. Fascinating. Homer focused on the mythic past, Herodotus on, this recent past. I mean, he's writing, the farthest he goes back is maybe 150 years. And then he doesn't spend a lot of time on that. He spends a lot of time with Cambyses in 535, so 50 years ago, and spends, again, a third of his work on the recent invasion, the years from 490 to 479. So roughly 3 1/3 books are a decade long, whereas Homer, the Homer's Iliad is 24 books of poetry, and it deals 1 year, but it's so far removed from the past, whereas Herodotus is, people are still alive. He's still able to interview, so to speak, people from the past who fought at, for example, Marathon, whereas Homer, you can't really interview Achilles. And you can see the other examples there. I mean, written down, versus oral performance, entirely first person versus, the Muses are the ones telling the story, digressions versus stock epithets, things like that. Here we have a map. We can see of the Persian Empire on this side, and then we have the Greeks over here. Sparta, of course, being here. Athens is up in here. The Battle of Thermopylae here, this is the Hot Gates. And so the Persian invasion is coming here. This is how it does it. The breakdown of the work. Herodotus' work, as we have it today, is 9 books named after the Muses. These were, of course, done by the Alexandrian scholars after Alexander sets up his famous library in Alexandria. When in doubt, name a town after yourself. He did that well over 30 times. We haven't found every single Alexandria yet. His first 6 books deal with the background info and cultures to the people whom the Persians are going to come in contact with. So Scythia, Egypt, down here. Ethiopians further down here. Digression on the Spartans, digressions on Babylon. He spends a lot of time talking about cultures. And the last 3 are actually about the Persian Wars, so about both the naval and army and land battles that happen here. So within the histories, history, of course, is what we think of as histories, but the Greek historiae has a lot more connotations to that. It means, history in the sense of like what happened, but also because it literally just means inquiry. History just means inquiry. And so whatever one defines as his inquiry follows into the genre of history. So that's how today we have, a plethora of genres within history. You have, political history, you have social history, you have women's history, you have economic history, you have intellectual history, you have the history of history, historiography. That's what I study. Um, and so all that is contained within the broad, think history with a capital H, think like the form of history. Um, and so Herodotus, the first guy to do this, isn't too terribly different from that. Um, his history, he has geography. He explores the regions that people live. So that's why the Egyptians have thicker skulls because the sun beats down on them. Or the Scythians have the women disease that plague their men because they're cold all the time. And he explores ethnography, the writings about people, their cultures, their habits, what they do. Um, and so all of this gets umbrellaed into his history. Um, and something that doesn't happen in his predecessor or his predecessor Thucydides. Thucydides, who writes about the Peloponnesian War, and he writes at the beginning, he's like, I'm not going to talk about fanciful stuff, and so he's already he already creates a polemic against Herodotus. And says, I'm going to focus solely on autopsy, solely on the scientific stuff. And by doing that, he limits himself to a military slash political history of the Peloponnesian War, which there's nothing wrong with that. But when we think of history as a capital H, there's more to it than that. And so Thucydides, of course, alive during when Herodotus is writing, and Herodotus is alive at the start of the Peloponnesian War. Peloponnesian War being Athens v Sparta in an all-out grudge match. Of course, Sparta becomes victorious, but they both wear themselves out way too much to the point where Philip II of Macedon can come down and take them out. And Thucydides approaches history as like a science, as a social science. So we have then the two big schools of history, of historical thought, set up in the 5th century classical Athens. Herodotus as history, as literature, as something, as an art, as a humanity. Thucydides, social science, something that you focus on, that you need to be able to astutely test and things like that. Unfortunately for us, Thucydides died before he finished his work. He leaves off it's like 408 roughly in book 8. For the year 408. He was alive to see the end of the Peloponnesian War. He was a general in it. He loses, and so he exiles himself. And that's when he begins writing. He begins writing probably something like 422. But it cuts off mid-sentence book 8. But it would be a fallacy to assume that Thucydides, by rejecting Herodotus, isn't influenced by him. He's definitely influenced in the idea of writing history. And Herodotus, therefore, rightly deserves his place as the father of history, unlike what Plutarch says about him. Oh, Herodotus is the father of lies. That barbarian lover, Philobarbaros. Herodotus sets the stage, sets the bar for how history is done. And up until only recently, second half of the 20th century, have historians started going back and realizing, oh, Herodotus is doing history the way we want to do it. We want this all-encompassing history. We don't want to divide it in micro schisms between us, because then history loses its meaning, in a sense. It loses the inquiry it loses what it's about. And so I hope you've enjoyed this little presentation about Herodotus. I really hope I've done him justice in the roughly 10 minutes or so I've been speaking about him. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I did my master's thesis on this guy. He's fantastic. I did my undergraduate thesis on him as well. So I've spent a fair amount of time with Herodotus. I only have about 4 or 5 copies of his text. Leave me alone. I only have about 4 or 5 copies of his text. So if you ever have any questions, please feel free to let me know. In summation, Herodotus, Halicarnassus, does history, does it well, does it as an art. Thank you.